Okay, friends, welcome into another episode of Story World, episode number 17. Alex, how you doing, man?
I am doing great, and I've had some episodes before that I've been really excited for. This one might be the number one so far.
Does this one take the cake for you?
This one takes the cake. So for all you listeners out there, this one we're actually going to be reviewing a movie, a longtime favorite of mine, and then a new favorite of Steve's,
Yes.
the Prestige.
Yes, the prestige. So, we're gonna just dive right into this because who knows how long we could talk about this. So,
Yeah.
what I'm gonna do, I want Alex to sort of set up the this conversation for you with the exact same quote that opens up the movie to kind of get you in the mood for this and to get you thinking about the content of the movie. So, take it away, man.
Every great magic trick consists of three parts or acts. The first part is called the pledge. The magician shows you something ordinary, a deck of cards, a bird, or even a man. He shows you this object. Perhaps he asks you to inspect it to see if it's real, unaltered, and normal. But of course, it probably isn't. The second act is called the turn. The magician takes the ordinary something and makes it do something extraordinary. Now you're looking for the secret, but you won't find it because, of course, you're not really looking. You don't really want to know. You want to be fooled, but you wouldn't clap yet because making something disappear isn't quite enough. You have to bring it back. That's why every magic trick has a third act, the hardest part, the part we call the prestige.
Yes. Beautiful, and I love how just profound and deep that quote is. It's
It
like
really
almost if there was no more movie behind it.
eh,
Um,
just
you
that
know?
quote enough. As someone who's not a magician, I like to just kind of see how they like that definition of it. I mean, from my perspective, it's pretty solid.
Yeah,
But the quote, in its exactness and its introduction to the movie sets the stage for how refined and exact the movie actually is. It is a perfect opener.
yeah, I agree. Now I something I don't know because I don't know magic other than, growing up watching Penn and Teller and David Blaine and all of that,
And
which I always found really fascinating.
yeah,
Um, what a cool theme that you sort of see in this movie all throughout seems to be a a line between what's real and what isn't. And,
mm,
um,
yeah.
and so I was actually wondering how far that goes. I mean, is it true that is this something that they talk about in Magic, the pledge, the turn, and the prestige, or was it made up for the purposes of this movie? Do you know that? I don't
I
I
actually
can't remember.
haven't looked at it. I probably have a long time ago. I honestly think that that probably is true. Now, I don't know if a magician creates a trick and every single time he says, all right, what's the pledge? What's the turn? And what's the prestige? Who knows
Right.
exactly how that is? But I think it's
Yeah.
more of a general thing, kind of like a movie is a, generally speaking, has a three-part act or,
Right.
books even. But like when I'm outline in my book, I don't necessarily think about it in three parts, even though that's definitely there. You have the introduction, and this is different. The thing that makes this, I guess, first of all, before we keep going, spoilers all around for this movie. We are talking about the movie, what happens. So if you haven't watched it, go watch it. I don't like it, go watch it. It is a fantastic movie. But if you have seen it, great. But the great thing that this movie has, I guess you can just simplify it into a three act scenario, but the movie acts itself as the first part is the pledge, the second part is the turn, and the third part is the prestige. And I imagine we'll probably jump around a lot, but I figured we could kind of take each of those steps in turn and just kind of walk through it if that sounds good to you.
Yeah, yeah, that'd be fantastic. I'm definitely gonna let you sort of lead the discussion because I think you told me you've seen this movie like literally over 100 times. I have seen it once, so
I
uh,
have watched it. I have watched it a lot. I don't know how many times, but yes, I should have kept count because there's been a lot. So just a real quick tidbit. The first time I watched it was I had to have been 13 or 14, I guess, when it came out. I watched it right when it came out. I must have been that old, 14. And I was on a flight back from vacationing and they played the movie on the plane. And I think it was a loud environment, it wasn't very clear, so I kind of followed along, and this is not a movie where you wanna kinda follow along. So,
right,
I just didn't care
sure,
for it, and then a year or two later, I started to really get into movies again and watch a couple more Christopher Nolan movies. And I was like, "Oh, The Prestige." I remember kind of watching that, and I watched it, and then watching it fully and sitting down blew my mind. So anyway, that's kind of how I
Mhm.
started liking it, and my dad loves it as well. We probably watched it together a dozen different times. But so I'll start with the actual kind of plot and setting of the movie. So the
Yeah.
Prestige is a 2006 mystery thriller film directed by Christopher Nolan, written by Nolan and his brother Jonathan, based on the 1995 novel of the same name. So it is based on a novel from the mid 90s.
Oh, I didn't know that. Oh,
Yeah,
there's a new fact right there
I
for
did.
me.
I knew that he and his brother Jonathan Nolan like wrote it, but like for the movie, but I didn't realize it was actually a book. And there were some changes that they made from the book that I think worked, and we can cover them too when we get to them. But anyway,
Oh,
the movie and the book, but the movie follows Robert Angier and Alfred Borden, rival stage magicians in London at the end of the 19th century. Obsessed with creating the best stage illusion, they engage in competitive one-upmanship with fatal results. Literally. So I think
oh,
that
man.
kind of sets the stage for it. Um, but anyway, so and again, I've watched it quite a few times. Doesn't mean I can recall scene for scene and replay the whole movie in my head, but essentially the beginning of the movie um kind of has a few different timelines. And I think one of your notes too, you kind of mentioned the flashbacks. How did you kind of so in the beginning, it kind of sets the scenes for three different timelines. The one you see Alfred Borden in prison for the murder of Angier. And then I guess the middle timeline, if you will, is Angier traveling to Colorado to see Tesla. And then the first
Yeah.
timeline, I guess the oldest timeline is when Alfred, it shows the actual story in chronological order with with Angier and Borden. So how did you kind of like that setup throughout the movie?
Yeah, I thought it was really fascinating, and we've talked about this before, the use of flashbacks in movies and books, and I love, uh, it's I love just how masterful again, spoilers are gonna be all around here.
Yes.
I should caveat it again.
Every time.
Um,
Yes,
um,
spoilers, spoilers, spoilers.
but I love how which I mean, anyway, if you're a story nerd, like, you just kinda have to see this movie anyway, so, like, just
Yeah,
just just watch it,
just watch it.
you probably already have, so, um but I've mentioned before that I love when I can really be surprised by the
Mm,
flashbacks.
yeah,
I really
absolutely.
love when it can be so seamless and I'm just like, "Ah, like, what even happened there?" And, like,
Mhm.
for me, thinking back to the movie, which I actually kind of wish that I had watched it, I think, a second time even before we had this conversation, but if I'd waited till then, who knows when I got around to it. So,
Right.
to actually find 2 hours, that would be amazing. But for me, like, the best memory I have of being surprised by the flashbacks is there were sort of 2 parts in the movie where, um, the so, of course, you already mentioned how they were reading each other's journals
Yeah.
because through different circumstances, the journals had been acquired, and at 2 different parts in the movie, you have each one sort of coming to the end of reading the other's journal, and in both cases, the person knew, like, it was intentional that
Yeah,
they
you do.
ended up
Yeah.
with the journal, and so, like, just when it was about to get to the good part, it says and it calls the other guy's name, and it's like, basically, "Gotcha."
It's
And
interesting,
yeah.
and each of those because I kinda have a point too of touching on there were multiple climaxes in this book, and not just mini ones, but big ones, and the big ones were that I remember I had a friend that I watched it with in college who had never I shouldn't say that, it was at Pensacola Christian College, we weren't allowed to watch movies, but
Uh,
somehow we
uh,
had to
uh,
so anyway, we watched, we watched the Prestige, he had never seen it before, and I remember when the first um reveal happened when Angier was reading the journal in Colorado that he dedicated, I don't know if it was a year or 2 years or 3 years, but I think it was a year of his life going over to see Tesla because that's what Borden's journal led him to. And at the end he gets it and he's reading it, but in Borden's voice and saying, you Angier reading, my journal. I hope that and you as he's reading it, you can see Angier just gets
yeah.
torn up and angry. And I remember my friend, of course, we both paused too to talk about it. You kind of freaked out as well. I remember my friend,
Yeah.
he was just freaked out. But then when it happened the second time, when Borden was reading Angier's journal in prison, he paused the movie and stood up and just like was just didn't know what to say.
His
He literally
flapper was
just,
gasted.
yeah. Oh, his flabber was gasted. But that's what makes this movie so great. Like typically that would
Yeah.
be in a normal movie, that would be the climax. That would be the ending. And you're like, "Oh, the
Right.
whole
Yeah.
time he knew he was gonna set it up." But like this had that's not even like the big ending,
I
you
know.
know?
Yeah.
But yeah,
Insane.
the flashbacks and Nolan's known for kind of distorting time in his movies and telling it in very unique ways. We'll have to watch Memento sometime for you to see that.
Yes, I would love to.
But I think there's just so many ways that they could have messed it up and have it feel awkward or clunky or not hit home, but everything
Yeah.
was just set up perfectly in that way.
Yeah, I was looking for plot holes. I mean, after it went along, I was really I started thinking back and I was looking for plot holes and all the ones that I could think of, I came up with pretty reasonable answers to right away. So I don't think they're actually
Yeah.
plot holes, but just to kind of put a nail in the coffin there on the flashbacks, at least for now. Yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, I think I had maybe I didn't pause the movie because it didn't have the controls, but I probably could have. I mean, I had a pretty similar reaction whenever because I honestly didn't expect it. Now, I I didn't expect it either time, but I gotta say I really didn't expect it. More towards the
Mhm.
end when
Yep.
Borden was reading Angier's journal,
It's
and
probably because it already happened once and you're getting close to the ending and you're just not expecting it
yeah,
at all.
you're not thinking, like it's just surely it's the furthest thing from your mind that the same thing
Mhm.
is gonna happen
But it
in
hits
reverse.
but it hits even harder. It's not like a repetitive thing like, "Oh, they did it again."
Right.
It hits harder
Yes,
than
it
the
hits
first time.
harder.
Oh,
And
man.
because the circumstances like, the first time around, the circumstances were kinda like, "Okay, like, I could see how that happened or whatever," but the second time
Yeah.
around, for me, like, the circumstances of him actually acquiring the journal and everything are just it just makes it that much more,
And
unbelievable,
and
so
again,
it's really fantastic.
we're kind of fast forwarding, which is fine, but this is just kind of a free throw thing. But what makes the second one hit hard too is because you don't again, spoilers, you don't know at that point that he has been that Ajir has essentially been cloning himself and killing himself. You think that he is dead. And
Exactly.
so then when it says that, yes, you Borden in the prison cell for my murder. And I don't know if you remember about that part when he's reading it, Angier, speaking as he's reading it, he kind of whispers it out at the end. It's kind of like a really
Yeah.
like and
Eerie.
for my
Yeah.
murder. And so Borden's like, how did he know that I was gonna murder him? Just so
Yeah.
good. But anyway,
Love it.
so going back to the movie where obviously they're they kind of work together and again, we don't have the detail to go through every single scene, but you can tell at the beginning they obviously want to be amazing magicians. And
Mhm.
Borden's always hitting
Yeah.
on. Remember, they go to watch that old Asian guy with the fishbowl, and they're
Yes.
both amazed by it. But Borden's like, the real trick is this when he's outside acting like the crippled.
Yes.
And you can just see early on hints of him, like, even though Angier in the end goes in my opinion, the more kind of insane route with
Yeah.
just got everything he does. Borden, though, right from the get-go was like, "No, like, this is life. Like, this is how it has to be. Like, this is my
Yep.
life with secrets," and he was just really serious about it. Kinda like an idealism, you know? But anyway, so at the beginning, um, so the rope scenario where, there's the tank and then Ingir's wife, is obviously up there on stage and Borden. I mean, we're led to believe, and most likely he, tied the rope where she wasn't able to get out, and she ends up dying from the tank. And it's it's been kind of a light movie up to that point. You're just kind of interested to see what's going to happen when the magic
Yeah.
trick can get it started, and then that series happens.
Boy, it gets intense. Oh,
I
it's
just
so quick.
I just remember when it gets I think I actually paused the movie or said something to you like it begins, and that was at the part where they're in the morgue saying the farewell and Borden shows up and Angier says, "Which knot did you tie?" And he says, I don't know. Now,
Right.
a couple things and I just started thinking about this because obviously one of the twin brothers was on stage tying the knot. The other one wasn't. So I wonder if at that morgue scene If it was the
Really
one
didn't
that did
know.
not tie, it really didn't know.
Yeah, if you
The
really didn't know.
the one part
I didn't make that connection.
the one part that got cut up through the movies that's kinda noticeable afterwards is when, Borden's wife would, Sarah, I think, would keep telling him,
Yeah,
like, "You just don't love me today," or, "You do love me this time, you mean it this time." But that one, I think it just if you
yeah,
rewatch it and ask yourself, like, "Okay, which one is in this scene?" Because there's some important scenes where it could really make the difference.
yeah. I'm thinking at the meta level here as well as
Yeah.
we're talking about this, and I'm trying to decide how, like, I mean, we're obviously there's gonna be spoilers here, but, like, if since there are gonna be spoilers, I'm wondering if we should just be really clear. I feel like we're being really vague about the plot to this point,
Okay,
and I
no,
don't
go for
know.
it, yes. No, say
Yeah.
whatever you want, yeah.
Well, I was just gonna say, I don't know if we're frustrating, people. I mean, hey, you listening out there, like, I don't know if we're frustrating you by, like, talking around things and you don't know and you're just, "Oh, now I gotta go see the movie," or if you'd rather be like, "Hey, speak clearly." I feel like
That's
I
true.
should maybe
Speak as
just
clearly as possible. Yeah,
okay.
I'm with that. Maybe I haven't been trying to avoid it. I guess maybe I should just be more purposeful as I
Yeah, yeah.
talk about it.
Well, so I think maybe this. I think
Yeah.
maybe I mean, again, like I said, don't listen to this if you don't want spoilers. If you've already seen this and you know kind of whatever, then fine. But like if you're listening to this and you haven't seen it and you do want spoilers, like I think we just kind of need to be clear about how the end game goes.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, go
The reality of the situation is that okay, these two magicians are competing with each other, trying to outdo each other, and basically what happens is when the guy's wife dies, which is the
Mhm.
scene we were just talking through, they were doing a water escape trick. And I mean where the assistant is basically in the water and she is trying to get out, and the guy's standing off to the side. The one guy's assistant basically is standing off to the side, or his magic engineer, not technically
Mhm.
his assistant, with a stopwatch counting to 60 seconds because that's kind of the no, after that. There's no hope of rescuing the person because they're going to drown, and so he watches that time click out. And before then, they had been going through these different scenarios where you've got different kinds of knots that you were going to tie.
Yep,
They had been tying a basic slip knot, but they were going to try a more complicated knot because it would, I guess, be a better trick, right? It would be a better
yep.
escape if the knot was more complicated. And
And
it had
also so
led
that she wouldn't slip from if
to that she
she
wouldn't.
lifted and break her leg or something. Yep.
Exactly right. So, basically, they said they were gonna practice that and whatever. Whether or not they did, apparently they didn't have it all sorted out, and the guy pretty much, I guess, it's pretty clear that he did tie the wrong knot.
Mhm.
And then she ended up dying, and then so that's what really sets off this competition between the two. Is the one guy gets really upset because in his mind the other guy killed his wife. All right, so that's
That's
important for you to
right.
understand. And then the other thing on the really like at the end of the deal, at the end of the game, the important thing for you to understand is the guy who, so there's two guys, Borden, right, and Angier, and at the end of the day, Angier ends up basically cloning himself
Yep.
in order to accomplish his transporting man trick, which will probably come up as
Yep.
while we're talking through this. But just keep that in your mind. The one guy ends up cloning himself. That's the secret to his magic trick. And then the secret to Borden's magic trick, the guy who accidentally killed the guy's wife, is that he and his magic engineer, they call it an engineer or whatever the French word, but it's basically his magic engineer. The magic engineer is wearing a disguise, but basically they're a twin. They're absolute twins, and nobody knows it, obviously, throughout the movie. And so he ends up, his big trick ends up being the transporting man, and he accomplishes it through having this body double that nobody knows exists.
Exist.
So
Yep.
there's two of the one guy, and then at the end of the day, the other guy ends up cloning himself to accomplish his trick. And so that's sort of like the context that I think you need in order for much of our vagueness to make sense all throughout as
Yeah,
we're talking
absolutely.
about
No, that sets up what happens in the story, absolutely. And so that kind of wraps up the first act or the pledge, if you will.
the pledge.
You're
Yeah.
saying, "Hey, here's these 2 magicians." Borden, I wouldn't say killed his wife, but, set up a scenario where unfortunately she passed away, and then
Yes.
that's the pledge. These 2 magicians now are gonna be going at it through the movie. Um,
Yeah, and so to clarify that one scene you were just
yep,
talking about, right? The guy gets really mad
yep,
because again at sort of the morgue whenever they're burying this guy's wife, he he asks the guy, "Which knot did you tie?" And the guy's
mm,
like, "I don't." I don't
Don't
know.
remember or I
And
don't
then
know. Yep.
I don't remember. I
Oh,
don't know.
he said something along the lines of too, it was so good. He said something along the lines of, I ask myself that question every day. And then Andrew says, and he says, I don't know.
Yeah.
It's just so good.
Right, and of course you don't have the context that it very well could have been the one who because there's
Right.
2 of them. There's
Yep.
2 guys that you find out, at the end, and so it very well could have been the one who just didn't know. So,
Yep,
yep.
absolutely. And so moving from there, and of course, the middle, there's a lot of flashbacks and scenes going back and forth. A couple, a couple scenes that I really want to hit hard on, and I guess kind of the very next one is so. I think the next big thing that happens is Borden gets married and they have a kid, and it's kind of rough. Money's tight and everything, and he's telling his wife Sarah that he's working on this big magic trick, which ends up being the transported man. But he's doing these smaller shows leading up to it. And at this time Fallon gets introduced, which of course, let's see that we're talking open now, is his twin brother that you don't realize until the end. But Fallon, known as Steve and I were trying to look up the French word engineer or whatever, but
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
it's just French for engineer. So basically,
Right.
Fallon is set up to be the guy that helps him set up his tricks and everything. Um,
Yes.
but so Borden and his twin brother, dressed as Fallon, go to this kind of underground magic place, to show off their show, and the crowd's booing him, and he ends up whipping out a gun to do the bullet catch trick. And for anyone familiar with it, and you stick a bullet in a gun, and while you're loading it in, this is in the 19th century, mind you. So while you're loading it in, and you take out, I don't know what the name of the tool is that goes down the gun barrel. I don't know what it is, but the
Oh, it's
instrument
like
that pushes it.
I
It's
know
like
what it is, but I can't remember.
yeah. Anyway, the bullet catches it into it, so there's not even a bullet in there. However, Angier dressed up in some kind of facial hair, kind of dresses up to see what the show's about. He ends up being the chosen volunteer to fire the gun, and when he's handed the gun, he ends up putting a bullet inside. And so
Yeah.
Borden turns around, expecting his magic trip, and he comes face to face and he sees Angier. And that scene is so tense because it zooms up and you see Angier's face, and you see him just looking so intensely at
Oh,
Borden.
yeah.
I wouldn't even say it was like hate. It was like a man, I don't know how to describe it, just like a determination, like he's gonna get this guy to
Yeah.
confess to tying that knot. And so he says, which knot did you tie Borden? And Borden says, I don't know. So anyway, Fallon, the twin brother, sees what's happening, kind of steps in as he fires the bullet. And as he shoots it, it does hit Borden and it takes off. I forget which two fingers, if it was his pinky and ring finger. I think
That's what I think it was.
I'm pretty sure that's what it was. And so that's kind of the next big scene that happens in Act Two and really creates a scenario for the twins on how they're going to do their special act.
Yeah, yeah, that's right. And again, kind of to fast forward there, you end up seeing like what all it takes to actually
Mhm.
maintain the persona throughout, right? So obviously, Fallon, which is of course the twin and body double of Borden, um, all his fingers are intact.
So what do
Uh,
you do, Steve? You can't grow new
and
fingers, can you?
and no, you cannot. You cannot grow, new fingers, and so to maintain the
Mhm.
persona, they had to literally chop off, in a very crude looking way, mind you, in the flashback, and you
Yes,
saw them do this
absolutely.
because you don't know this until the very end of the
Until the very end,
um,
yeah.
but yeah, they had to actually chop off the guy's fingers, and then maybe that's a little something too. Like the guy ended up wearing a glove afterward to conceal that. But no, it's not a plot hole because when he was showing up, because they switched out. That's the thing. It wasn't just like one guy was always Fallon and one guy was always
Yep.
the real Borden. They actually switched out, and so they both had to appear to be exactly the same throughout no matter what circumstances
Mhm.
happened. So if one of them had lost a leg throughout, guess what? The other one was
Yep.
losing a leg. Like
Yep.
they just had to do it to
It
maintain this persona, and that's why it's so like they really mean it when they say that like the magic is like they live it, like it becomes a
Mhm.
part of them, it becomes their life. They're so committed to it because that's the nature of the trick. Nothing matters more to them. So
One of my, kind of moving on, but one of my favorite scenes in the movie I have so many favorite scenes in the movie, I'm gonna say that probably several times. One of my favorite scenes in the movie is when Olivia, the new assistant, comes on and starts assisting Angier, and he ends up going to see Borden's show, the transported man, his big
yeah,
one. And I love this part because after he goes to the show, it kind of skips the show and it shows Angier sitting at the in the studio or whatever, and Olivia's there talking to him, and she says, "Well, what did you think?" And he's like taking off his disguise because he didn't want to be seen there. And the music kind of builds up, and he says like something along those, "It's the best magic trick I've ever seen."
Yeah.
And essentially, of course, if you see the movie, what it is Borden has a rubber ball, and there's two doors up on stage, quite separated. I don't know if it's 30 feet or something like that.
Yeah.
He bounces the ball to the other door, steps into the one that he's in front of, closes it, and then he pops out of the other one. In of but two things here. Of course, at the end, it's his twin coming out, his double. But in the movie, I like this part because I don't know if you remember, Steve, they don't show you the trick right away. Do you remember that? Instead, so Andrew says,
Yeah.
best trick I've ever seen, and all you kind of see um what's Cutter's face. So Cutter is Angier's engineer. You see
Yeah.
Cutter's face just kind of watch, and you hear the ball hit the stage, and then like a couple people clap. And then it kind of goes on discussing how like he doesn't dress it up enough and he delivers it poorly. And that's when the arguments ensue about Angier and Cutter arguing about Angier thinks there's something more than it being a double. Obviously, there's something more about it than just being bored and coming out with his twin, but he is obsessed with figuring out why the trick works because he is
Mhm.
convinced that it is not a double. Whereas Cutter is keeps telling him like it's a double. He said the only way he
Yeah.
knows how to do it, his word for was using a bloody double. And
Yeah.
so anyway, I
Yeah.
kind of want to get your thoughts on that part because this is kind of where it gets interesting.
Yeah.
Where as the you're kind of doing two things when you're watching it for the first time. You're trying to just kind of keep up with things and maintain what's happening. But then at the same time, I would assume at that point, you're also trying to figure out, okay, what's going on. So do you kind of remember where you were at that part in the movie and kind of what you were thinking about?
Oh, yeah, that's a really good question. Yes. So, what I was sort of, I don't know that it's right to say, well, I'll say it this way, I agreed with Angier. In other words, I thought, in
Mhm.
fact, I think I remember even saying out loud, I don't know that I was necessarily saying it to you, I was just I think I said it out loud though. "No, that's too simple." Uh
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
Like, I agreed with Angier. I thought, "No, that's like using a double? Like, that's not magic enough." That was my thought,
Yeah.
like, my
Yep.
my thought was, like, because, I mean, anybody could, I mean, again, it was the 1800s. I mean,
Mhm.
a lot of what we call science today, those people would have seen as magic. So maybe there's a little bit of
Right.
um of temporal bias in my looking at the situation. But as I look at the situation, I definitely saw the same thing that Angier did. I saw that and said, no, it's got to be more complicated than just a a double. And so what my thoughts about that particular scene are that they're both right. Now Cutter, of course, was like, "No, it has to be a double." Like you said, a bloody double.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
got
It
to
has to
it
be.
it's got to be a double, and I don't remember the exact circumstances, you
Mhm.
probably do, that ensued, but they ended up for Angier to go ahead and copy that trick to start with, they ended up going ahead and actually getting a double.
Yep.
So they did finally go ahead and decide to do that. But, again, like I say, I think there was some truth to it for both of them because in the one sense, it's with Angier, um, it's like, yeah, there has to be more to it than this. It turns out there was more to it. It wasn't just a double, it was his twin. And I think, to me, I think that sort of justifies Angier's supposition. Like, okay, it was a double, sure, but like it's not
Mhm.
boring. It's not, oh, we went out and found somebody who looks a lot like me and
Mhm.
dressed him up and whatever. Now, ironically, because Cutter was so convinced that it was a double, that's what they went out and did. And I just thought it was so, I almost saw it as Cutter, I don't want to say giving up in this case, but like just again, just sort of bending to what to me would have been boring magic. Just, "Oh, we'll go
Mhm.
find a
Yeah.
guy that looks kinda like this other guy,
That's a great point.
dress him up a
Yep.
lot more, and whatever." And so while it was a double, it was just boring,
You're right.
and,
Cutter was not impressed with the trick. He's like, "We can do that better." I forget exactly what
yeah,
he said, but
right,
basically like, "Yeah."
right, exactly,
Yep.
because the point was that Borden had very little showmanship, whereas Angier had a ton of showmanship.
Yep.
So, basically, the point
The
was,
greatest
all
showman,
we
one
need
like
is
I
a
said.
double. The Greatest Showman. Nice one. Nice
Yeah.
one. Nice one. We will make that connection for anyway. So
And
um but what Cutter was seeing was this opportunity to basically take the delivery, the presentation that Angier could bring to the table and using the same sort of trickery as Borden, but just presenting it better and therefore having the better show, drawing the bigger crowds, making more money, etc. So Cutter was looking at this very practically, which I think is funny because he's the magic engineer, whereas Angier was obsessed with no, like that's not it. There's something else going on here, and he really was obsessed with the magic of it all. In a sense, he was buying into the
he
magic,
he was
like
obsessed
he
with the
expects his audience to. So
he was obsessed with the magic, but then also, and remember, kind of at the beginning, Borden was kind of, I guess you could say, kind of the crazy one or intense one about the magic. Idris wanted to be great, but Borden was like, yo, he made it his life,
yeah,
and he did. But this is kind of, it transitions to Angier being obsessed with being better than him, and
yeah,
it
that's right.
really starts eating. I think it's a really good transition. The one thing too about how Angier thinks that there's more to it, which there was, just not to the extreme that he thought, although it was pretty extreme. But and then Cutter was like, it's a double, so he was right technically. But the thing that again, what makes the movie just so great is that it would be one
Well,
thing.
Scarlett Johansson and Piper Perabo in the same movie. In my opinion, that's what makes it great. But
There
whatever
you
you're
go.
gonna say, I'm sure is important too.
It will let the audience decide. So um what makes it one thing that makes it great is that you don't just have Borden up there and then he has a double come out that looks just like him, but the double comes out missing those two fingers. And so when they're arguing
Right.
about this, Olivia says it's this, like, she agrees with Angier. She says it's the same man because he's
Yeah,
fingers. And that
that's
at that,
right.
because at that part you're hearing them arguing, trying to figure out. And then when she says that, you're like, oh my gosh, like that for me, I remember going back and
Yeah.
kind of one of the first like times I watched it, because I think there was a time between the first and second one I watched it that I kind of forgot some stuff. And I was like, man, like
Mm.
cutters make sense that it's a double. And then I got to thinking, but if it really is, where can you find a double that's missing those two fingers? And for me, that part was like there at that part, I kind of knew as long as it was delivered well, I
Yeah.
knew that I was something big was going to happen at the end of the movie.
Yeah.
I couldn't figure
That's
it
a
out,
great
but
point.
like I just you knew something big was going to happen. And that's
Yeah.
when you start to wonder like, okay, is it real magic? Is this movie going to show something about real magic happening, or like something has to be
Yeah,
going
you're
on?
right. Oh, well, okay, let's go ahead and we'll do the story world thing and tie this into my realm for just a minute.
Yes.
So really what was happening, that was a very strategically planned piece that was written into the script in order um to make the reader or the watcher side with Angier. I mean, that was the point. The point was to remove that obstacle, right? Cutter introduced this obstacle of, oh duh, it's a double. But she comes back in and says, no, like they were missing the fingers.
Yep.
And so that's gonna make you just not even think anymore down Cutter's path, right?
Yep.
Immediately when Cutter when they start to go down the road of getting the double, for Angier's show, you immediately start to think that they're giving in, that they're actually just not going as far as Borden because whatever Borden's doing is the real thing. Like, so just that one little
Yeah.
misdirect
Just that one
happens.
little thing. It,
And in
it
my world, I don't want to say we call it a misdirect, but we do the same sort of thing. So the standard like copywriting formula, like that probably more than 50% of sales messages end up being is called PASS, problem, agitate, solve. And in the agitate phase, what you do is, or at least one of the things that you want to do is eliminate alternatives. So again, this is something that applies across the board. But as soon as you come in with what you are saying is, okay, you have this, you're identifying a problem for your potential customer or client or whatever, and you're agitating that problem, you're making it worse. Now they know that you're getting ready to say something, you're gonna get ready to offer them something, right? You're getting ready to say, "Hey, yeah, now buy my thing. I have the solution to your problem." Like they know this is coming, and so what they're immediately trying to do before you're allowed to get to that is they're already questioning in their minds of how other than your solution they can go ahead and do it. And so how can they solve their problem on their own without even needing your solution? That is always,
Mhm.
I don't Like if you think about this at the like actual meta level, next
Gotcha.
time you're considering a product or a service and you're being marketed to, think about this because I almost
Mm.
guarantee it's happening.
I've
And so,
noticed that before. Just yeah, that's a big
yeah,
thing.
it is, and so what the marketer wants to try to do during that agitate phase is eliminate alternatives, and so, like, for the vast majority of products and services, there's 3 big things, like, it's basically, do nothing at all, like, well, what if I just don't do anything at all? What happens if I do nothing?
Mm,
Um, what happens if I find a cheaper option? Like, whatever he says, I'm gonna try to go the cheap route, and then the other one is do it myself. What if I just do it myself?
yeah.
So immediately in your sales copy, you're saying, well, one of the worst things you could possibly do is to do nothing at all. Because if you don't do anything, then you're going to change or you're not going to change anything about your current situation. And this is why you're in the problem that you're in. And then you just move to the next one and systematically eliminate all the objections that you possibly can to make room for them being accepting of the offer that you're going to make them.
Mm,
And so I think something very similar is happening here, where basically you are being offered and a way to overcome the objection in your mind of, "Oh, yeah, Cutter's right. This is just a clone." You're being misdirected so that you don't take that bait and you don't believe that, and that you immediately think whatever Cutter and Angie are doing is ultimately subpar to whatever Borden's doing,
yep.
and then the story moves on from there. So I just thought that would be a neat little excursus.
No, no, that was good. I appreciate it, Steve. I like your I say rabbit trails, but it's more like a moose path because it's big and it continues going and going and going.
I'm not sure how to take this.
That's okay. I don't
Alright,
even
good.
know how to take it. That just came to mind. So,
So
there's a lot of stuff that kind of happens still during the turn of the movie Act Two, and so just kind of hitting some points here. This is the point where Angier just, even though his magic show it is better, he throws the hat on stage and his double comes up through the stage. But remember, Angier underneath the stage is taking a bow to the audience clapping, but they're not seeing him, they're seeing his double.
exactly,
And
yeah.
I forget the exact scene or what. Oh, it was when, so he ends up sending Olivia to work for Borden so that he can get his secrets. But, and you don't find this out till later in the movie as a flashback, but while she's there, she says, basically like, "He sent me here to work for you, but like, I I don't care about that. Like, he's become obsessed with you. He hates that he has to bow." No,
Yeah.
Borden knows. He says, "How does he feel about taking bows under the stage every night?" Because he
Yeah,
obviously knows it's a double. Because his act is a double too. But
exactly.
the watcher of the movie is still trying to figure out what's going on there. But so essentially, and if I've missed some stuff there, because some stuff does happen through there, like Borden ends up getting a hold of Angier's double, and at one point too, he removes Borden removes the sacks that Angier falls onto, and he breaks his leg. So a couple things happen there.
Oh,
You can
yeah.
touch on it if you want, but essentially, it's kind of Borden really kind of gets the better of Angier during this time. But the big thing, and again, it kind of tells it in the flashback, but during this timeline, um, Olivia basically sets up Angier, gives Angier his diary, and
Yeah.
in that diary, it basically says at the end of it, oh no, basically tells him to go to Colorado to and the key word that was given to Angier was Tesla. So he says he's going to Colorado. Um,
Right.
I guess the important thing to note too is so she gives him the diary. What another great scene is when she says something like getting the better of him or one upping him, something like that won't bring your wife back. And he says, "I don't care about my wife. I care about I think his magic trick or something like that." And that
Yeah.
was another one that was
Hit hard.
just hit hard.
Yeah.
So anyway, I guess kind of the turning point there is and again, I forget specifically when this happens, but basically they end up, I say they, Angier and Cutter end up capturing Fallon, one of the twins, and bury him alive. And that's how he gets Borden to give him the key word to the diary so that he can figure it out.
Yeah.
Um, and so anyway, and that's what gives the keyword is Tesla, and that's what brings him to Colorado. And so that kind of where the two timelines kind of merge at that point. Um, I know that we kind of have a couple topics to talk about when it comes to Tesla in this, so maybe this is a good time to dig down into that.
Yeah, no, that's a good transition. It's just interesting. It was good timing to watch this movie, especially with all the fun Elon Musk stuff
Oh
happening in
boy.
in the news these days.
Y-
But I've always been interested in Tesla, even before anything to do with the cars or Elon Musk or whatever. I've always thought that the character of Tesla was interesting and a little mysterious. Because you see him every now and then pop up in pop culture references or things like that. Like I think I remember growing up, one of the games on iOS that I used to play a lot was called Field Runners,
Okay.
and it was one of those tower defense games. If you're a gamer, you probably know what a tower defense game is.
Oh, the
Uh,
Flash arcade games from the mid thousands. Did you ever
I
play those? That's where I
no,
played a lot of tower defense games. Like, you just go on, like, I think it
cool,
was like www.playgames.com, and there were hundreds, if not thousands
interesting.
of games. Yep, absolutely.
Interesting. Okay. Well, no, I don't think I ever did that. Or maybe I did, but anyway. Yeah. So this is a tower defense game called Field Runners, and I think one of the towers in there is called the Tesla something,
Oh, okay,
and
yeah.
um, and it just always fascinated.
Yeah, that's right. Yep, I remember something like that.
And Yeah, and so again, I think Tesla being brought into this is a really fascinating thing. When we say Tesla, of course, we mean Nikola Tesla. Like he was an inventor. He holds many patents. It turns out that he invented AC. Um,
Not the air conditioning unit, the
Not the air conditioning. No. It's what is it called?
something,
Alternating current.
the alternating current, yep.
It's alternating current, so there's alternating current, and then direct current, um, AC/DC, and so he invented alternating current, which is most of what we use today. I mean, when you plug something into the wall, you're using alternating current, and so but what's interesting is there's a whole, like, tangent that you can
Mhm.
go down. I know because I just went down it, a few days ago. There's a whole tangent you can go down of basically Einstein versus Tesla. So the very like
You mean,
the
Franklin.
oh, huh?
Franklin
No,
versus Tesla, right?
Frank, no,
You
no,
said Einstein.
I don't,
Are you
yeah,
correct? Is it Einstein? Oh, okay.
yeah, not
Okay.
Benjamin
Okay,
Franklin, no,
sorry, keep going, keep
no,
going.
yeah, Albert Einstein, yeah. So there is, and it actually hints at this in the movie, which is cool. But there's this whole, and to give you like the 10 to 15 second version of it, basically Tesla was a very smart dude. He became an employee of Einstein's. Einstein hired him to improve upon the direct current. And instead, he tried to prove that the alternating current was the better way to go. And Einstein didn't like that. And so Tesla sort of left and promoted his own thing, pushed his own thing. And unfortunately, the way it all shook out is Tesla was the better inventor, but Einstein was the better marketer, okay? And there's a lot of lessons that can be learned in there, especially as a marketing guy. One lesson though is the nice guy doesn't always win. The right guy doesn't always win. I promise you, in your history books, you learn a billion times more about Albert Einstein than you did about Nikola Tesla. But Tesla is arguably more important in the development of electricity. I mean, even radio. Radio is something that I forget the guy's name, but some other dude got credit for the invention of radio, and it was really Tesla's invention.
Uh,
Um,
I can go back to the Einstein thing. I
yeah.
said Franklin, but wasn't it Thomas Edison?
Yes, it was not
We
Einstein.
were both wrong.
We
I
were
was
both
like, no,
wrong.
Benjamin Franklin was from like 100 years before, but I was like, Einstein doesn't make sense. Thomas Edison.
Thomas Edison. I'm so sorry. Yes,
So
Thomas
we
Edison.
both, okay, we're on the same page now.
We were both wrong. At
That
least
was
I
bad.
said E. At least I had an E. You had an F. You're moving up the
Yeah.
alphabet.
It's fair.
Um,
Okay.
yeah, that was terrible. Anyway,
Anyway,
so Thomas Edison. I should know this because New Jersey, Edison, New Jersey. I've been there. Anyway, so that's where I grew up. So anyway, Thomas Edison. And Edison was a better marketer than Tesla, and Tesla deserved more credit but didn't get it in a lot of things. And so Tesla, what's interesting is though, like me and like you and like a lot of other people, like Tesla is not like an unknown name. I mean, yeah, even Elon like helped that along a little bit, but like again, even before Elon, a lot of people at least know the name of Tesla. And it's kind of like this vague notion of like, wasn't that
mhm.
the guy that like shot electricity between towers or whatever? And what what this movie brilliantly does, and presumably the book as well, but what this movie brilliantly does is trades on that fact. It sort of uses the fact that you know a little bit about Tesla, but not a whole lot as
Mhm.
currency, um, as mental currency for you,
Yeah.
and
To kind of fill in
it's
the blanks, you kind of go with it like, okay, what's the movie have to say about him?
that's right, and it kind of presents an opportunity here for some historical fiction,
Yes.
and because like, again, one of the crazy things about this is like, yeah, this is like late 1800s or whatever when this movie is set. And we have a lot of, again, just bias because of when we live and where we live. But a lot of the scientific inventions that are like coming to maturity today, like many of them were like in the beginning stages of like being possible even back then. And so it's not so far fetched the fact that you see Tesla being brought into this movie. And so I'm just kind of like, maybe I'll let you take it from here, but I just wanted to sort of set up the Tesla angle in this movie. Basically, he gets introduced as a way to think of the a possibility. How's the movie puts it basically as something like what other people do is magic, like happening for real. They and Tesla is supposed to be able to help accomplish this in the movie.
Yeah, so I guess two things to talk on it because we talked about this quite a bit too right after the movie because it is a weird part of the movie. Just to kind
Uh,
of breed,
yeah,
he ends up getting Tesla provides a engineer with a machine that clones himself. So obviously that the movie so far has been, I'd say, 100% like realistic. There's nothing that's
yeah,
that's like fantastic or sci-fi about it. It's just it is what it is. So up to that part, and so when you introduce Tesla, um, a question comes up: is it too far fetched to fit in this fairly normal movie? And so that is the one thing about the movie where I could see someone having a problem with it. I remember the first time I watched it, I was like, okay, that seems like what do you say? Is it called jumping the shark?
yeah. I
No,
was gonna
or
read a little bit
yeah.
about that if that's okay.
Yeah, go for it.
After
Get
you.
the yeah, no, go for it. Go do that, then I can get back to my other point. That's fine.
Okay. Okay, yes. So I mentioned to Alex that we might call this jumping the shark. And this is something that I'm just going to read what it means and then I'll explain. So this is right from Wikipedia, the ultimate source of internet truth. The idiom jumping the shark was coined in 1985 by John Hine in response to a 1977 episode from the 5th season of the American sitcom Happy Days I think I said 1979, 1977 episode from the 5th season of the American sitcom Happy Days, in which Fonzie, Henry Winkler, jumps over a shark while on water skis. The phrase is pejorative, excuse me, and is used to argue that a creative outlet or work appears to be making a misguided attempt at generating new attention or publicity for something that is perceived once to have been widely popular but is no longer. So, um,
Mm,
it's probably not a direct parallel, but the
yeah.
reason why I sort of use this analogy, when I was talking to Alex is I thought that maybe because again, everything if you could see in the movie, like, at to this point, like, they're obviously showing you, the watcher, the viewer, the behind the scenes of many of these magic tricks, right? And so they're like at most of them, in fact, you're seeing like a lot of the like mechanical devices, and you're even seeing there's this one scene with birds, right? The magic trick is with birds, and basically like the like this is how Borden and his wife meet because they're in this little shop and they're watching the magic trick or whatever, and the guy does this trick and it
Mhm.
appears that the bird lives. And then so Borden notices this kid who's really interested in the magic, goes up to him, and there he's like, I assure you, or he was had this horrified look on his face, about the bird being killed or whatever. And he was like, I assure you, like the bird's just fine or whatever. And you know, showed him the new bird and he's like, well, what about his brother?
Mhm.
Um, and he's like, oh, you're a smart one, aren't you?
Yeah.
And it ends up that the kid, like his mom, becomes his Ford's future wife. So anyway, the point there is that like you see a lot of this gruesome, very realistic stuff that goes into the magic. Well, then in comes Tesla,
Mhm.
and uh, again, I, some of the Tesla stuff, I think as the movie progressed was okay. I think where I really got the thought about jumping the shark, or in other words, in this context, introducing something that
Mhm.
seems wildly fantastic in
Yeah.
comparison to the rest of the realisticness of the rest of the movie was at the very end. And so basically the last scene of the movie is you basically see just a room full of water tanks with clones. And we'll explain some of that, but basically you see a room full of dead clones as a result of Angier using this machine that Tesla created, and Angier using it in his magic tricks. And you see all these dead clones. And at that point, I had the brief thought of, oh, well, did the movie just kind of punt itself into absurdity there? You know, did it jump the shark? And I actually don't think so. After considering it, but that was my first thought. So anyway, there's that, and I'll let you take it from there.
Yeah, so, I guess one of the so, yeah, kinda go along with what you were saying is I think that it would seem like a, I guess, like, a scapegoat or something like, "Hey, just let's just fit this in to make it tie together." I think the reason why it is not that is when you like what you said, when you really think about it, um, how purposeful that setup was to tie in a lot of different, for instance, how Angier's, wife died, by drowning. And so that is the way he basically obviously, he ends up living, but his clone, which is still himself,
Yeah,
ends up drowning just like his wife did. And one thing that is, I don't know if it doesn't show directly if this was his way of coping with it, but, at the beginning when at his wife's funeral, Cutter says that he met a sailor once who had drowned and come back to life or resuscitated, said that drowning felt like going home. It was like a peaceful experience. And then so I think that is one way where he kind of said, like, okay, like, I'm killing myself every night, killing my clone, but at least I'm not, it's not as bad as what it could be. Um,
yeah,
and so that really ties in a lot there. And then also, kind of like what you were saying, how there's two different things here. Science really helps a lot with magic in the beginning, like where you were mentioning with the table opening and the bird dying in the cage, with the and I don't know if this is a real instrument, but the one that on his back where the bird could live. A lot of science up and lifts and pulleys and all sorts of stuff helped with that. And so I think it was just a great, and Tesla said that one thing, and again, I don't know how this is true to his real life, but he said when his first invention or the first time he brought something to the market, people hailed him as like a hero or a visionary. And the second
yeah,
time he did, he was a cast out and no one wanted anything to do with him. And so just a lot of just kind of comparisons there in relations on how things can cross the line and be too much. And so anyway, it
yeah,
just ties into a lot of different things where it makes sense to have it. Even though it is out there, it's it feels natural. Like at the end it is kind of weird, but
yeah,
you still think it's cool and it feels natural to you. Like there's
yeah.
some movies that introduce stuff like that where it doesn't feel natural. I can't even at the top of my head, but you're like, that's just too weird and it kind of ruins the movie. But this, if anything, makes it seem like, wow, like that's kind of creepy or that's odd.
Well, and I think what ultimately ends up making it, in a sense, allowable, if I can use that term, is the vagueness behind the character of Tesla. I mean,
Mm,
what most people know about Tesla, even if they don't know anything else, is that he was ahead of his time. I mean, most people at least know that about Tesla. In that, like I just
yeah,
mentioned, I mean,
absolutely.
100 years ago, he was doing stuff that like is really just coming into a public acceptance, etc. Um, today, I mean, he basically, for in a manner of speaking, prophesied in direct statements what we have today in
Mhm.
mobile phone technology. I mean, he basically prophesied that. And so and by the way, today we can now, not to the degree which um not to the degree cognitively that the movie suggests in this cloning, because it basically in the movie what ends up happening is these clones that are made of Angier are direct, like, they have his
It is
memories
him.
and
It is
everything else.
him. Yeah.
It is him again. It is another him,
Yeah.
okay? While it's not we don't have the ability to do that today, but we can clone things today. We can clone dadgum sheep, and we can clone. I mean, probably to some degree, again, clone humans. I mean, again, I don't know. That it's a lot scarier than I really feel like googling. But just to be frank, but like we like as unbelievable as it seems, we can clone something today. And so the fact that it was happening back then, again, Tesla was a guy before his time. The electricity stuff, sending things from one place to another is like, I mean, it's hard enough for me to believe that I can like be talking to you on a screen like that. I mean, it's still, I'm a tech guy, and to me, this is still like difficult to believe that we can do. Um,
Yeah.
so I think it's allowable. I don't think it's jumping the shark. At first I thought I did, but then when I thought about it more, and especially the weirdness behind Tesla, I think it's something that you could totally believe.
Maybe we're kind of being a dead horse here, but just something that popped in my mind is how, like, he said that, like, I think it was Tesla that was saying that man can only handle like one change, like at a time. He can't jump. And so
Yeah.
you're right. The fact that they used Tesla, who's this obscure guy who was ahead of his time, I was thinking, really he was a one of a kind in that way. Where like what you said, we can clone things today. So it's almost it's believable because it's not like taking 10 steps that he's cloning himself for the
Oh yeah.
watcher. It's like taking 2 steps. It's like that's kind of odd, but it was Tesla. Theoretically it could be possible in this world. So it's
Yeah.
believable enough where it's like that.
Yeah.
And
For
like
sure.
it would be one thing if he went over there and Tesla had like it went super nuts with like a lab underground, and you had like almost like Attack of the Clones in Star Wars, where you had like these clone people walking out and he has like this laboratory and everything. That'd be one thing.
Crazy.
But the
Yeah.
fact that it's like his experiment and he kept it secret, you're right. It takes that step, it pushes the boundaries, but still makes it in the believable.
Well, and you see him fail too. Like
Exactly.
in
Yeah.
the movie, you
Yeah.
see him fail. I mean, they're constantly, again, it's awesome. It's like the best misdirection, because you see him constantly, it's constantly bringing you back to reality in what he's trying to get him to do. It's bringing him back to reality, because it's like, no, this isn't working. This isn't working. And then eventually, you see, what they were trying to do was transport something from one place to another. I mean, they were trying to go all Star Trek, and at no point did that end up happening.
Hmm.
And so even that in itself is a failure. The fact is, what the machine did do was subpar. All
Yep.
it did was make
Absolutely.
a copy of something else in the final analysis. That's all it would end up
Mhm.
doing. And so because of that, Angier had to improvise. It wasn't ideal. He didn't actually get to transport. It still ended up being a clone, even all the way through all that trouble. But anyway,
And
so
it
I
sets
do
it
think
up.
it's believable.
It sets it up too, where in the end you see how much his passion for just overcoming boredom and one ruining his life and two being the better magician consumed him, where he was willing to just go through those motions of killing himself night
Yeah.
after night, and just it really made a pathway for that to come to fruition at the end. But anyway, let's so there's a lot of stuff we kind of done a little bit, but there's a lot of stuff that happens with the Tesla, I guess you can kind of say subplot, with Edison's men coming and, again, like we said, the failed attempts and the experiments. But
Yeah.
the result of all that is Edison's men, or I think Tesla burns his own place down. Angier thinks that he's not going to get his machine, but
Yeah.
then lo and behold, he actually sent the machine to the hotel we were staying, and they kept it for him. And so Angier has this machine now
Yeah.
that he brings back to England. And so anyway, what the and watching it for the first time, you don't know what clones anyone until the very end, so you just think it's transporting him. I think that they call it the transported man. I forget what the name that he called the magic trick, like the ultimate transported man or something like that. I forget
Yeah.
the name of
Something
it.
like that.
But
Yeah.
anyway, and so it was like, so he comes back, and it's 100 shows only. And anyway, at this point, Sarah Borden's wife, killed herself. I feel like we kind of skipped over that, but throughout the whole movie, you see her not knowing that her husband's a twin, but she's constantly dealing with her actual husband and then her husband's brother, not knowing it, and with the secrets that both her husband and Fallon keep, and it gets to her, and she ends up killing herself. Which
Yeah.
and I felt I don't know, obviously like any part like that's supposed to feel sad, but I felt like it was again, just a natural progression up to that point, and I thought that part kind of really hit home.
Well, all of those things, again, these were sort of, I don't know if you could say subplots, I mean, maybe they were, but
Mhm.
these were all things that sort of reinforced, um, how seriously they took the magic, right? Like, how serious this persona was to them in both cases. Um, the magic preserving the magic was obviously more important than preserving the relationship for Borden.
Mhm.
And then for Angier, like you mentioned that scene earlier where he's getting frustrated and he's like, "It's not about her, it's about this trick."
Mhm.
Um, and so for both of them, all of these things as you go along, again, just I keep using the word misdirection. A point that I wanted to make anyway, and I'm gonna go ahead and check it off my list here, is that the entire movie felt like a magic trick to me.
And it is,
It
it's
it
set up
is.
that way.
Yeah.
It's so great.
It's absolutely masterful, but as you go along, you're constantly and, I don't even know, like, you find yourself rooting for different people all
Mhm.
throughout, even up to the very last minute. You really don't know, like, whose side, um whose side to be on,
Yeah,
because everybody
yeah.
experiences loss and everybody experiences, there's just all these emotions going on throughout the whole thing, and so it's just
You
really
keep using the word misdirection, but I think that's the perfect way to describe it. And in a magic trick,
Yep.
especially with you want to do misdirection. You show the audience your hand and something you're playing with over here while you're pocketing something. You're doing something, to set up
That's
the
right.
next thing. In this movie, I forget. I was reading one review of it, and I forget the writer of it worded it very eloquently, but basically says that Christopher Nolan dangles the answer in front of you to the whole movie, but he just keeps you so far enough in looking at this direction, that direction, where
Yes.
you don't know it until the very end. But yeah, you have, like what you said, for lack of a better term, subplots with Tesla and then Sarah Borden's wife, and then Olivia stepping into the picture and then reading the journal and getting kind of, a climax there and, thinking, oh man, that's his journal. He knew he was going to read it. You have all these little things going on that even though at some point you almost forget about the transported man at points. You forget that the
Yeah.
thing is, oh, how does Borden do his trick? Because you're focusing on all this other stuff. And so anyway, he does that very well. So anyway, so now we're at the part where uh Olivia is sitting down. I don't know if you remember the specific scene, but it was after Sarah died. Olivia was sitting down with Borden in the restaurant. And at this time, it's Borden. I know they're both Borden, but it's Borden's brother, the one who actually does love Olivia and did not love Sarah because that wasn't his wife. And he says, still keeping the secret, he says, I love you. I didn't love Sarah because that's true. He never did, but she thinks he's kind of crazy. She says, you could be sitting somewhere else with some other woman telling her the same exact thing. And then she basically gets up and leaves.
Yeah.
But before she goes, she says, he's back, they're saying it's the most like magnificent trick in the world or something to that effect. And so obviously Borden can't help himself. And he and I guess his brother too go and they watch the magic trick and so Angier steps into the machine and it transports him up on the stage. Of course, at this point, if it's your first time watching, you think, okay, wow, it's transporting up there. But in
Yeah.
reality, he's falling through I don't know what it's called. I'm blanking here, but
A trapdoor.
trap door on the stage into the tank where he drowns. And then the clone, which is still Angier, is, you know, and he finally gets his showman where he can actually be the
Yes.
prestige and have people cheer for him. And that's what he's always wanted. Well, not everything is always wanted because ultimately he knows that Borden cannot keep away from knowing his trick because it's
Right.
better than his. So even though Angier's the one that's obsessed with overcoming it, he still knows that Borden has that in him. And I remember a couple really good scenes in here. Do you remember throughout this where it shows Borden yelling at Fallon in their, like,
Yes.
why, like, can't you figure him out? Like, why can't you beat him? And it just shows how frustrated they are with
Yeah.
not being able to figure it out. And he says, like, we're done, like, not go back there. Like, he, basically ends year one. But apparently, one of the brothers still wanted to figure it out. And so this is kind of, I'm kind of going faster to get to this part, but like, is there anything you want to add for during this area or? are you good to kind of go to?
No, I don't
Okay.
think so. I think this is probably where some of the details get a little blurry for me, having
Okay.
it only
Gotcha.
having been my first time through, so I'm gonna let you
Gotcha. So
explain.
I'll walk through it. Okay. So Angier just knows that Borden is going to want to inspect that thing and come up on stage and see what's happening. And so he's looking for him dressed in disguise coming up on stage. And so the night happens where, um, Angier sees Borden come up and he knows he's going to be going downstage to see what's up with the trick. And so on this particular night, then he walks out into the machine, falls to the trap door, and of course, he reappears up in the grandstands or the balcony. But instead of reappearing to the audience, he just decides to stay back, and instead, his original self falls through the trap door, gets into the water tank, it locks and it shuts, and Borden is down there and sees him drown. Now he tries to get him out. He hits the thing with an axe and everything, but essentially
Yeah,
what it comes down to is they believe that he goes to court and they say, hey, like he had plenty of reason to kill him, for jealousy and this and that. And obviously he was there at the time of it. And so he gets sentenced to death by hanging because
yeah.
of killing him. And so that's kind of where that part leads up to.
Yeah, and for me, and I'm just assuming that what happened to me, I'm almost, like, unsure, in a sense, but I'm kind of assuming that what happened to me is what was meant to happen to me and what maybe happened to other people. At that point, I was thinking 'cause again, the clone thing had not been introduced yet, and so at that point, my sort of thought was that the trapdoor thing, because again, they did this with like literally they talked about it intentionally. Like he said, whatever this show does, whatever this new show does, it has to be so interesting that Borden shows up. Like he wanted
Absolutely.
him to show up. And so I personally thought that the trapdoor thing was not like, happening every time. Like, I thought that the trapdoor thing was a one-time thing for the night when they knew Borden was there,
So at this
and
point, you literally thought he was being transported. No
yeah, I
cloning.
still
Yep.
yeah, I still because
Yep.
I didn't have any reason to suspect
Oh yeah.
cloning.
Why
I
not?
mean,
Yep.
you've seen the movie 100 times, but I haven't.
Right.
And so for
Yeah.
me, at this point, I have no reason to suspect, um, that cloning is what happened. The only reason that I would have to suspect it is that, like, the last time that you see the machine working,
Hmm.
when it's at Tesla's shop, it's only it's only cloning. But, like, the conversation that they have at that
Hmm.
point is, "Oh, obviously, we still have
He's
some
gonna
kinks to
work out
work
the
out."
kinks.
And
Yes.
so we think and so the viewer thinks, "Oh, well, he's gonna work out the kinks," and because we all know at this point what the goal is to make this thing transport you. And so, through all the testing that you see, Angier do, you're just thinking, "Oh, yeah, the machine is obviously working. This is a no-brainer." And so I thought that sort of the ultimate at this point, Angier has very little left to lose. I mean,
Mhm.
his wife,
Absolutely.
his first wife died, right? His love interest, like after he kind of kicked her um out to use he used her, right, to get to Borden. I mean, even Cutter really didn't have that much to do with him. I mean, he was sort of like
Hmm.
there was nothing really left for him to live for. And so I was kind of thinking that the ultimate, that he would be willing to pay the ultimate price of death if it basically meant execution
Burning the
for
world
for
down.
for
Yep.
Borden as well, right? Just
Yep.
basically burning up the whole thing. And so at this point, I thought the whole idea was, okay, Angier goes down the trapdoor, basically posthumously frames Borden for murder. And in my mind, what further cemented this was that when this happened, again, every other night, just 10 seconds after the trick like really went off, you would hear the crowd go off for the prestige and
Mhm.
everything. But in this time,
Mm.
there was no crowd reaction. Everybody was like waiting for the trick to happen. And so again, here I was thinking, well, yeah, there's obviously no clone. I mean, I
Yep.
wasn't even thinking there was obviously no clone. It didn't even enter my mind at all because it was like, oh no, here's the guy. He's
He's
here,
dead.
drowning in
There
this
he is.
thing.
Yep.
He is drowning himself to frame Borden for murder. Because again, the trial, like about the trial in the prison because
Right. Yep.
that's
In
going
that
along in
timeline.
flashbacks all throughout the movie. And so at that point, I'm thinking, oh man, this guy legit killed himself in order to get because he
Mhm.
knew that if this guy was successfully pinned for murder, that he would get, he would have to hang, he would get, executed as well. And so that's it. Everybody dies and and everybody loses everything, scorched earth
Mhm.
kind of idea. That's kind of where my mind was at this point in the movie.
And that's really interesting. It's been so long since I watched it the first time. I forget what I was thinking at a certain point. So it's nice to hear kind of you walk through it. He kind of talks about it at the end, Angier does, but just put your so put yourself in Angier's mind where he turns around, not that specific night, but every night that it's gone well and he is the prestige, and he steps on that thing and he's so calm, but in that moment he knows he's killing himself. He's gonna, and not just killing himself, but like drowning, which I would assume is extremely painful. And so it he knows he is gonna die, but then he also knows he's gonna live. But then here's the thing. So he dies, and then literally himself is cloned, and he comes out, and he's the prestige. But then still though, that whole time he's like, I'm gonna have to drown again. Like
Right.
it's just a weird cycle where every single
Yeah.
time he knows he's gonna drown. It's crazy.
Yes, and it's important to remember again because for the person who now knows that he was actually cloning himself instead, that
Yes.
clone, when that clone steps out, has all the memories, literally right up until the
Yep.
second that the last that he was cloned through the thing and the guy went through the trap door. That's where kind of the memory gets severed
Hmm.
because that's the moment of the
Right.
clone happening. And um so, point being, it's consistent that there was no prestige that happened at the end of that trick because the cloned Angier
Mm.
knew what the other Angier did, that he killed himself, and so it was already part of the plan,
Yep.
not to show up as the prestige because everybody had to think that he was dead. So
Yep.
everybody would think that Angier is the one who, or that Borden rather drowned Angier, and then the story, goes on. And so I don't know if now is when we should introduce the mysterious Lord Caldwell or whatever his name was, or if that's coming in your mind.
Well, I was actually going to ask you about one thing first for you to tell something because I think it was an interesting
Yeah,
take on. We both had two very different takes on it, and I think they're both good about when Angier cloned himself for the first time and saw his
yeah,
clone. Why didn't he just keep the clone and just have a legit double at literally as himself? And
right.
why didn't he just stick with that? And you had a really good thought about it. I thought that would be good to bring up.
Yeah, well, and now I feel pressure, right? I hope I say the same thing that I said
No,
back
you're
then.
good. You're good.
If not, maybe you can refresh my memory. But uh, my thought was, well, because then you still have two distinct. If he keeps that clone, you still have two distinct personalities existing at the same time, and one of them would always not actually be the prestige because at that moment you have a separate consciousness. Even though it's the same, it's literally an exact clone with the same memories and everything right up to that moment. It still could not it still at the end of the day would not be him truly being the prestige because whichever one was below the stage or
Mm.
wherever to make the trick happen would still be
Would still
taking
be there.
the bow below the stage. And so I think that in order for this to be consistent, it couldn't just be a clone.
And the other thing that I thought, which I think these two go hand in hand, I don't think those are right or wrong. I think they're just compatible, is that um if he did it that way, he would still just be using a double. There would be nothing interesting there than what he done before. So even though it is himself, the
Yeah,
trick
right.
essentially is a double. And then of course, obviously, and the main reason, which is should just be mentioned, is that it, in that scenario, I guess he could ultimately frame Borden, but this is just a better setup for it. Um,
Yeah.
but in any case, so moving on, yes. So Lord Caldwell. So why don't you take it on your view of Lord Caldwell? Because you kind of said you had a hunch it had to involve Angier.
Yeah. So remember that the one of the things floating in the back of the mind of Angier, well, actually not in the back of the mind, it was really very much at the forefront
Mm,
of his mind, is he wanted to know the secret to the trick. Because remember, he still doesn't he still doesn't know.
right.
Okay.
Yep.
Angier still through all of this stuff, Angier still has no idea that it is actually a, twin brother, okay? There's no literally, you don't find this out until the very last scene
Yep.
of the entire movie, okay? So, of course, now we who have seen the whole movie have the benefit of knowing that there's a clone out there who didn't show up for the prestige. And there were two characters that I was skeptical about throughout the whole movie. Fallon, which
Mhm.
is the engineer for Borden, who ends up being the twin brother. So I was right to be skeptical about him. He didn't speak. He was very, it was just weird, right? He had what seemed to be close relationships with people, and yet he never spoke a word. So it was just really strange.
Mhm.
And the other one was this Lord Caldwell figure. I think I'm saying his name right, Lord
Yeah,
Caldwell.
Caldwell. Yep.
Um, and so who is Lord Caldwell? Well, basically what happens is, um, Borden has a daughter, and you'll have to correct me if I get any of these details wrong, but I think I have them right. Basically, Borden has a daughter, and the daughter, I mean, with Borden going to prison, the mama was dead. There was basically she was going to be put into whatever sort of, I guess, social welfare program, and who knows, God knows what would have actually happened to her
Mhm.
or whatever. So a mysterious figure named Lord Caldwell allegedly, sends his, I guess, just his assistant or his messenger or whoever to, um, the jail where Borden is being held, and says basically, "Look, if you give me the secrets to all your magic tricks, specifically the secret to the transported man, Lord Caldwell will personally see to it that your daughter is cared for and raised, and doesn't have to go into the horrible, welfare system or whatever." Now, immediately my suspicion was raised, and I didn't know how, but I have to admit I did have an inkling that Lord Caldwell was probably going to end up being Angier
Mhm.
or something like that.
Somehow.
I did
Yeah.
not know how, but somehow I figured that Lord Caldwell was going to end up being this guy. And um lo and behold, it was. Now I'm a little fuzzy on the details.
Uh, want me to tell the reveal scene when Angier as Caldwell meets Borden?
Sure, yeah.
Yeah, so yeah, it gets to the point where Borden just says, "Okay, like let me talk to Lord Caldwell," and so he comes out of his cell. He's in chains, but he sees his little grimp and he comes up and then he looks up to talk to Lord Caldwell because he's going to be taking care of his girl. Then he sees it's Angier. And I would
Yeah.
assume, especially from your point of view, even though you kind of knew it was Angier, if you still don't really know or seriously suspect the cloning, you're probably thinking, how? Like,
I know. I'm sitting
how?
here thinking, why does he I'm sitting here thinking the guy in jail should be asking this dude for his secret. Like,
No,
yeah.
seriously.
I really
And
didn't know.
then and then I remember, that's another great scene too, where Borden is like, he doesn't even care because it involves his girl. He says, "I don't know what you've done or what's happening, but we're talking about like my little girl here or life or something like that." And and then Angier's just again, he's sunk into the lowest place you basically can. He doesn't give a rip. Um,
Yeah.
and so anyway, so that was one part. And the next part, I don't know if you remember that scene, but Borden does give him the prestige to
Yeah.
it. And then do you remember Angier rips it up and throws it?
Oh, yes, that's right. Yeah,
I
I
w
do remember that. Yeah.
I wonder, I think this is just a matter of opinion. I don't think there's one way to know, but do you think he actually told the actual prestige? in there when it involved the life of his daughter? Do you think he actually put in there about his twin, or do you not think he did? Even when it involves his daughter, he still kept that secret. I mean, we'll never know. I don't think there's a right or wrong, but it's an
I I
interesting
w
thought.
I want to think that he did. I want to think that he did, but I don't know. I think my opinion would be that he did, but I don't know. I mean, his
Yeah, I don't
daughter.
know. I don't know if I have an opinion on it. It's a weird thing. But anyway, so yeah, so at that point, Borden tries to tell the guards, like, that's the guy that I'm in here for, but then it just, they know he's a criminal or whatever, so they take it away. And then really that comes to the end. Actually, I think in one of those scenes, Angier shows himself to Cutter. And I forget specifically that exchange, but basically Cutter is just like he just realized that Angier is crazy, and just it needs to
Yeah, that's
stop.
right.
And so yeah, and so then this
Yeah.
gets to the big finale.
Yeah.
So basically, uh it's kind of goes back and forth. There's two scenes going on, and it kind of goes back and forth rapidly. But Borden is it's his night to be hung or hanged, whatever it is. And so he
Yeah.
goes into the courthouse. And, well, actually, before this, Borden has a last conversation with Fallon, who is his twin, but you still don't know it at
Yeah.
this point. And he throws the ball to Fallon. He says like, "Hey, like, take care of her for me." And if you're watching it, you're thinking that he's just giving instruction to his engineer Fallon to take care of her. So
Exactly
anyway,
right.
so then it gets to the point where it shows Borden going to be to hang, and and then Angier and Cutter are at the warehouse where he has the machine stored, and as well as all of his clones and the tanks that are dead. You don't see the clones at this point, but that's where they are.
Yeah.
And so two great parts here are when and the music builds up, but then Cutter is just sick of Angier, and of course, and says, "Do you remember the one time when I told you about that sailor that died?" And Angier says, "Yes, you said it was like going home." And he says, "I lied. He said it was agony." Then he walks away, and then Angier's left to himself. And that part was just so good. You just and it tied in with the
Right.
music too, and you just know something tense is going to happen.
Yeah, we are about to find out that he experienced that same agony time after time after time
Exactly.
after time. Yeah.
And so then, in the same time, Borden's getting hanged. And do you remember what his last words were before he got hanged?
Yes. Yes. Yeah, I was gonna ask you.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so he
Yeah.
says abracadabra and then boom, and I think they make the sound of his neck snapping if when I remember it, so Borden's dead. So you see
Yeah,
Borden
well
died.
well, even before that, something that I liked was that he when he tells the guard, right?
Yes,
Is it watch
yes.
closely or
It's just
either
are
like,
you watching closely?
are you watching close?
And so
Yeah, 'cause that's a theme that repeats throughout the movie.
I guess
Yeah.
to kind of really focus on that part, if it's your first time watching the movie, you know that Borden's being hanged, but he tells the guard, "Are you watching closely?"
Yeah.
As the person watching it first, at least I would think, and I do remember feeling this part, I'm just like, I'm thinking, I know something's coming up that's gonna blow me away, but I just don't know
And
what it is.
my that was my thought exactly. I thought I have no idea. I mean, like, it seems like an impossible
Yep.
situation to escape.
And s
And he's like, but he just gives off this idea that no, it's getting ready to go down.
and I just wanna give a shout out to the writing
Oh
and
my
the
god.
filming and the directing where they're like, off the top of my head, I don't know if I probably think about it, I could think of it, but off the top of my head, there's no other movie that brings me that intensity at the end of a movie like The Prestige did. There's just no other like it, in
Yeah.
those final
Yeah.
moments. So, anyway, you see Borden hang, then it goes to Angier, in the warehouse, and he hears a noise, and he holds it up, and he says, like, "Cutter," he thinks it's Cutter, and then the ball gets thrown at him from the shadows, Borden's ball that he used in his trick, and then a gunshot comes out of the darkness and shoots Angier, and he falls to the ground, and then um, that's when the ball drops and rolls away, and then you
Yeah.
see a guy stop it with his foot and then bend down, you see the missing fingers, and lo and behold, it's Borden standing there.
Gordon.
And
Yeah.
yeah, not Fallon in his makeup, but Borden. And oh, what a great moment that is when you actually you just saw him
Amazing.
die in the last scene, and there he is. So what
Yes.
and it happens pretty quickly, so maybe you didn't have enough time to think about it, but um like right after that, Angier says like a twin, like he realizes it immediately. But when you saw Borden though reach down and you saw him alive, did you think like twin, or were you like, how is this possible? Like, just kind of, do you remember what your thoughts were there? Again, it
Mm.
happened so quickly, maybe you weren't really quite thinking about it.
Yeah, I do remember the exact moment, watching it, and I like, they said it did happen so fast that they actually narrated what was happening
Yeah,
before I could even think about
gotcha.
what was happening, and so my only thought was, like, I knew something was jacked up about Fallon the entire time. I also knew that legitimately the Borden dude, I mean, his neck just legit snapped across town. So like I
Mhm.
kind of just had those two facts in tension the entire time. And when he said a twin, immediately it was like, duh. Like that, it made
Right.
immediate sense to me. And then all these thoughts came rushing in of different scenes throughout the movie. And then basically from
Yep.
then until the end of the rest of the night, you and me talking about it,
Oh my gosh, yes.
more and more things became clear about the misdirection and everything. That moment was like the catalyst of
Yeah,
everything.
there's a lot of stuff too that obviously we didn't cover, but like Steve and I talked after the movie how there's not one filler scene in that movie. Every
Yeah.
scene is important and
Yep.
again dangles in front of you. Hey, here's what's happening. Like it's right here, but you just overlook it time and time again. And so yeah, in the end and Borden and Gier have that exchange where um even at the end, they're both kind of saying how much each had to sacrifice more than the other. So,
Yeah.
Borden's, and then that's when you see Borden's twin cutting off his two fingers. And then that's where you see one of them loving Sarah and the other loving Olivia. And then in the end, Sarah kills herself and then the other one loses Olivia. And then of course, like one of them dies in the end. One of them does get hanged and dies. And then at this point, Borden doesn't know that Angier has cloned himself still. He doesn't.
Right.
And this comes to one of my again, another one of my favorite parts of the movie where at the very end, um uh the warehouse starts being burnt down because of the lantern that fell, and Borden walks away. No, Angier's talking about how much he sacrificed, and he says, like something like, "Do you know where you are? Like, look around you. Like, look at the tanks." Like, basically, he wants to see how, like him that he's killed himself multiple times, and Borden doesn't look. But then at the end, and it's such a great scene. Michael Caine is narrating, as Cutter, and I have the quote here. He says, "Now you're looking for the secret, but you won't find it because, of course, you're not really looking. You don't really want to work it out. You want to be fooled." And at that moment, Borden is walking out, and he hasn't looked at the clones. He still doesn't know. But then before he leaves the warehouse, he finally does turn around because he's still curious on what Angier was talking about. And that's when you see all the dead clones that of Angier killing himself. Um,
Yeah.
and just up into the very end, even the movie just nails it every single step of the way.
Yeah. 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 That's it. And I just had, thinking about it, if I were to go back and watch it again now, like
Mm,
I would be looking for so many different connections that
mhm.
I promise you I would see tons of new things, even more than I had already thought of. And it really I have to say, I mean, again, I'm not usually one to just so quickly put a movie in my top 3 to 5. Um, I honestly like, I'm having a hard time. I mean, I love movies, don't get me wrong, but,
Right.
like, other than Apollo 13, I'm having a really hard time thinking of what would be my next one, and honestly, it may be Armageddon for me,
Yeah.
but just because I love that so much,
Yeah.
but, like, the writing was way better in The Prestige
That's
than
something that
Armageddon.
and like
Yeah.
we wrote up a couple quotes and talked a little bit about specific scenes, but yeah, I mean and especially once you've watched it even a few times and you go back and you don't have to focus on what's happened, you can really focus on the dialogue and the scene for scene, the word for word, and
Oh, yeah.
like what Steve and I were saying, there's nothing in there that's filler. Every single thing in there is purposeful. And we were kind of talking afterwards, obviously even with this, it's still subjective whether you like it or not, but it almost comes down to it being a near objectively amazing movie.
Right.
just from the
Yeah.
facts of looking of how it was made, you could almost make a case for it.
Yeah, it's almost like regardless of taste in movie, like the subjective thing, like that almost doesn't even matter in this case. The writing is just so objectively good that as writing and as movies go, um, as
Eh,
stories go,
yep,
really,
and
it's
the
hard to get
structure of it
much
all.
better. And the structure of it all, and the mix, that fine line between fantasy and reality.
Mhm,
Um,
yep,
you know, something that I thought was cool, and this is kinda like
yeah,
my last point. We've covered all my little points, that I wanted to kinda talk through. Um, I just thought this was really, interesting. So if you look at the IMDb entry
mhm,
for this movie, every, like, main, character has an entry except for Fallon, right? Who was the twin who plays the,
that's pretty
engineer,
cool.
um, for Borden. But, now again, um, Angier's engineer was played by Michael Caine, a very famous actor. So, I mean, they're definitely gonna have him in the credits, but it's really strange that Fallon, who was just as visible, even though he didn't say a word, he was an important part of the movie, and he has no credit. And
Mhm,
so I just again, I have right, I mean, I'm looking in hindsight. I get hindsight
right,
privileges of looking at the movie now, but I wonder if anyone ever made that connection. If a really smart,
mm,
person would have somehow been able to make that connection pretty much immediately. Like, oh, how strange that this guy doesn't get an entry, in the casting
mhm.
for the movie. Like, who plays Fallon? Because if you saw that, that would give
So
it
it kinda
away,
yeah,
of
exactly.
course,
That's
right? And
good that
so
they
it's
lived it out.
I think it's just I think it's just a really fascinating thing. Again, I don't wanna get, like, too crazy here, okay? I don't wanna go too meta, but this is another, like, really weird way that the movie actually, like, toes the line between fantasy and reality.
Mhm,
Like, I don't know, I can't think of another example of this. Maybe you can, I don't know. I can't think of another example where the plot of the movie, like, part of protecting the plot of the movie is leaving a main character out of the casting.
mm,
Um,
yeah.
I don't know that I've ever maybe I'm making 2
No, I
examples
don't
of
think
this.
so. I've never noticed
I
it
don't
either.
know that I have ever seen this. I mean, it would spoil the plot of the movie if a main character, in this case, had been given a
Mhm.
casting credit. Um,
So,
and that's just cool.
I
That's just
remember
so cool.
so, leading into this, I had told you several times, "Man, I hope you like it as much as I do." Because admit, it would have been a done if afterwards you were like, that was okay." But I remember something you said to me at the end, after a couple different things, you said something along the lines of, "Man, it was kind of a bad movie to start out with watching some of your favorites because I just think everything's gonna pale in comparison to this one." You said something along those lines, and
Yeah.
it's kinda true. Like, there'll be some other great movies we watch, but it's, it in this movie too, I it obviously, this is, like, very overstating, being a little dramatic, but it kinda makes me sad almost because like, this movie came out in '06, and every even great movies that I've watched since then just has never been able to give me that amazing feel that this one did at the end of it.
Yeah.
Like, I keep saying, man, in Christopher Nolan movies since then have been amazing. You got Inception, you have Interstellar, which is another fantastic one, but Interstellar comes, in my opinion, pretty close. Anyway, but even
I
all
can't wait to
those,
see that one.
oh, it's so good. But even with all that, just the prestige, I wish that there was a movie out there that could give me that same exact feeling. But what's funny is no matter how many times I watch The Prestige, I guarantee you I was about probably 90% as nervous and anxious as you were at the end of that. It gets me every single time I watch it because it's just so
Really?
dang good. I
Yeah.
want to kind of end my thing on. So I did maybe not enough research because I'm sure there probably is a legit plot hole, but I just googled like the Prestige plot holes, and Steve I think kind of did the same thing, and pretty much every avenue was, okay, like, yeah, that's possible, but, really it's not. This movie is pretty fairly airtight on plot holes. The only one I found that was somewhat legitimate and odd was, when, Angier's, wife, died, and she comes out of the tank. And, later on, he says, "Which knot did you tie?" Well, her hands were still bound in that scene. And, so on inspection, whether it was, someone inspecting her or even Angier there could just easily see what
Oh,
knot her hands was. Now, I wouldn't even necessarily call that a plot hole for one. I guess one reason is it doesn't matter. Like if it was the bad knot that he tied or the wrong knot or the knot that eventually kind of led to her death, Angier would still be out to get him. Now, maybe what would
right.
change is maybe he could, like, try to make a court case against him, but or and then again, another thing is someone in a rush could have untied that knot right then and there in the midst of all the confusion or something. So, it's not I wouldn't necessarily call that a plot hole, like, "Oh, wow, that kinda destroys the whole movie," because it doesn't, but that's the one thing I
Yeah.
found that was actually a legitimate kind of, "Oh, that's a little odd." But that's the only
Yeah.
thing I found, the only thing.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, I think that could be reasonably explained. I
Yeah.
mean, at
Exactly,
that
even with that,
I mean, even Angier, I mean, at that point, I mean, she's coming out of the tank, like, his
he
focus
was in
was not
shock,
anywhere
yeah,
gonna be on what
absolutely.
knot it was. It was like, no, like, why like, get her breathing, you know?
Exactly. Even
Um,
with that, there's so many legitimate reasons why they wouldn't notice.
yeah.
And so one thing I want to add that I didn't tell you before, I don't think I told you before, maybe I did, is that in the book version, I think the movie made this change. I think the change that the movie made was excellent. I guess in the book, instead of them reading each other's journals, I haven't read the book, I just read about it, that instead it was like one of their or both of their like grandkids reading it, and so, like, kinda telling the story through that way. So I think there were probably still some really cool reveals through there, but I think the movie is just delivers it much better with how Borden
Oh,
reads
that's
his
a
in
nice
prison, and
change.
so I think
Yeah.
that was sometimes, movies make the change for the better. I think that was one.
Yeah.
Steve,
That's beautiful.
we thought this was gonna be a
Cool.
quick episode.
It was not. No, it was not. Of course not. It never yeah. Oh, it's good. I there was so much to say about this. Again,
So
I
good.
loved it. I'm definitely going to watch it.
And now
Again, I
our
feel
wives
like
wanna watch it, so I think we're gonna have a movie night, we said, at some point,
I
and
know.
I just can't wait for that again to watch it.
I know it's gonna be so good. I'm gonna be on the edge of my seat again the entire time, I'm sure.
Mm.
Probably just because I just want to be like,
I know, like,
but
yeah, yeah,
how do I
absolutely.
keep it to myself? So it's good. Thank you everybody for listening. We'll get to our stories of the week here real quick. But yeah, I mean, this has been a cool discussion. So hope you enjoyed it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, if you if you listen to this whole thing and have not watched the movie, even with knowing the spoilers, watch it because it's that good, and you'll
For sure.
still feel the
Definitely watch it.
intensity of it.
If you're a story nerd, you have to see this movie. You could
Absolutely.
learn from it. I mean, you could absolutely learn from it.
Um, so yeah, anyway, I guess story of the week. What's funny is I don't know if you were serious about it, but I'm okay with the shared story of the week, or I'm just gonna go with Elon again.
Go for it. Go for it.
So, and again, I won't touch on it too much, but I just you know what? Sometimes the timelines mess up. Maybe we've already talked about this. I forget when it happened, but yeah, basically just Elon buying Twitter and them accepting the deal. Um, I guess the only thing that I just kind of want to touch on that's it's interesting just because of people's different reactions. Where so on the one side, I definitely understand where I think Elon's getting into something more that he doesn't quite understand. There are a lot of things, and it goes beyond my knowledge, but the technicalities of the algorithms that they use and different security stuff. So it's definitely not just an easy peasy thing. And maybe he does know that, and he's just not letting on. But obviously, it has
Yeah.
a challenge with how big a platform it is. But then man, on the other side, people just going nuts that he bought it. And I saw one thing, and it's so true that people are more concerned what Elon is buying with his billions and what the government is spending your money and trillions. And it's
That's
like,
exactly
dude, like,
right.
who cares if Elon bought it? Like, he bought it. And
Yeah.
then uh, I don't know. So anyway, it just kind of interesting following along that. And like I said, Elon's really just kind of he's a very big proponent on free speech, and so anything like that is good.
Yeah, no, I'm with you. So I will. I have a couple different ones we could go with here. I will choose an Elon one to kind of keep this as a shared story of the week. Um, I was actually doing some reading about. I've never really read that much about him, to be honest, before all of this, and but I am fascinated in him as a character. Given his just business acumen, and I really like this idea of kind of being the like at SpaceX. his job title is CEO and chief engineer. And you just don't see that very often. Usually a CEO is some suit,
Yep.
running the money and making sure all the little peons are doing their thing.
Not shooting
Don't
flamethrowers.
right. Not Elon though, right? Elon is literally the chief engineer. Like he the rockets that go like I honestly didn't know this. Tremendous respect for the guy. The rockets that freaking go to space today for SpaceX that are under $1 billion NASA contracts to move things to the space station and back and to move people, etc., are based on the, I mean, obviously with modifications, but the same original specs and designs that Elon himself designed and came up with. Elon didn't just hire a bunch of rocket scientists and say, hey, put this together. He did the work. He read, he designed the thing. He did the blood, sweat, and tears during the testing and all the failed launches that didn't actually even make it to orbit the first time. Like, it's his design. And obviously, he works with a lot of other smart people now, like tens of thousands, but
Yeah.
but like though he is legitimately as think about this for a minute. He's legitimately a self-trained rocket scientist.
Mhm.
Think about that for
Insane.
2 seconds. A
Yeah.
self-trained rocket scientist. Okay. Um, and you mentioned about the algorithms and stuff. I mean, most people don't know, but like that was his background, coding. He was a like so he founded what's called X.com, which later got bought by PayPal, and for a short time he was the CEO of PayPal.
Yep.
Um,
Yeah.
so
It's just everyone
legitimately
forgets that little tidbit.
right? Yeah, no, totally knows knows his stuff in that regard. But what I wanted to say, one of the interesting pieces of history that I found is that twice in his history of since the late 90s, um, of owning companies and being at the helm of these companies, twice has the board of directors not fired him totally, but ousted him from the CEO position as
Mhm.
being incompetent or inexperienced as a CEO. And when you think about the fact that today he is the CEO of like 5 companies, literally the richest man on the planet, it's really hard to imagine Elon Musk being ousted as the CEO because he didn't know what he was doing.
It's funny.
And it also reminds me of when Disney was famously
Mhm.
while Disney
Right.
was fired from a job back, in his early career for a lack of imagination.
It's
And
so crazy.
it just all goes to say, like, kind of the lesson to learn is that perception is not always reality, right? There are how people see things is it's just not always the way things really are. And so sometimes you got to look a little deeper and see, like, yeah, I mean, of course Walt Disney had tons of imagination. Like whoever fired him was a snot,
Right.
and it's like, yeah, with Musk, I mean, it's like, "How do you like me now?" I think of that country song, right? "How do you like me now?" Like, yeah, you
Yeah.
ousted me as the freaking CEO, and, like, today I'm the CEO of the whatever. Anyway, so it's just, it's some fascinating stuff. Again, Elon Musk is not some god figure, he doesn't need to become the next right, Donald Trump
Right.
or whatever, like, he doesn't need to be put on that kind of pedestal. Absolutely not, and he shouldn't be. But he is an interesting character, interesting figure, and, I think he's worth watching. So
Was it you that I told about him saying how he got into programming?
I don't think
He
so.
was, playing video games, and he said
Oh, really?
many of his I forget if he said engineers or programmers, probably programmers, he said many of them, he kinda likes it when they play video games and love video games because they naturally had
Uh,
got into coding because they wanted to learn. They didn't go to school for it, but they love video games,
yeah,
so they wanted to learn how to do it, and that's how they got to where they are. So,
that's
just out of
fascinating.
curiosity, so that's just something pretty neat.
Cool,
Um,
cool deal.
I think that wraps up this episode, Steve.
It does, man. It does. This was a great one. I'm really excited. Guys, if you really are enjoying this, we're excited about the number of downloads we're getting. I think
Absolutely.
it's really getting awesome to kind of see, like, yeah, we're doing this and people are actually like liking it and watching it and listening to it. And so that's really exciting. So take a screenshot on your pod or of your podcast app and share it on the social media. Tag me and Alex. Let us know that you like it or whatever and share it with others. That's the best thing you can do to help it grow.
Absolutely. Thank you, Steve. Until next
Yep.
time.
Until next time. Bye bye.